Thank you. And it is people like you taking to the streets, the marches, the messages, the actions and demands and shows of solidarity all across Ireland over the last 15 and 16 months that sent a message to the last government that words are not enough, we need action. And inside the Oireachtas, myself and many others, and outside, on the streets, in every part of Ireland, people said, here are some actions. We laid out the actions that could be taken. The arms embargo bill, so we are not complicit in the bringing of death from the air, that we are not complicit in the technologies and machineries of war passing through our airspace to destroy civilian lives. The call for an end to dual-use goods, those goods that can have one purpose, but we know the purpose they have, a new level and technology of death and of war crime. We called for an end to Ireland's complicity in investing our public money in occupied territories and in the companies that profiteer from that. We called and demanded, firstly as well, that very basic thing, that Ireland would pass the Occupied Territories Bill so that we are not complicit in occupation and in the brutalities of occupation and illegal occupation. And we are not complicit in the profiteering on the cruelty and brutality of colonialism. I was very proud to be a co-sponsor of the Occupied Territories Bill with my colleague Francis Black, and many others have supported it. And coming into the election, they said, okay, we have to say that we're going to act. And let's be clear, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael cynically misled the Oireachtas and the Irish public going into the election. And they hadn't even voted in themselves again as a new voted themselves back into power again before they started backtracking. So what a shame. So what has happened since? What has happened since? We have had a ceasefire, and I know our hearts are glad for a ceasefire because we are weeping with grief for the lives lost, and we're weeping with fragile hope for each precious heart still with us, for each Palestinian life that's still with us, and the hope that brings. We've had a ceasefire, and there's been an election across the Atlantic. But let's be clear what hasn't changed. International law has not changed. It is the same as it was a few months ago, and being very clear a few years ago. Because we've been telling them since 2017 that we must not be part of breaches of international law. That it's not that we can pass the Occupied Territories Bill, it's that we must pass it. And then the International Court of Justice came in the summer, and they reminded us, again, they didn't make it necessary, they reminded us, these settlements are illegal. This occupation of Palestinian land is illegal, and no state should be part or complicit in normalizing breaches of international law and the brutality of illegal occupation. No state should encourage, endorse, or trade with such places. That's what we heard. So, just to be clear, we have the backtracking on the actions. We're hearing worrying signs about backtracking even on the words. Maybe we won't have words next. That will be which comes. But coming back on the action, Micheál Martin has continued to dodge the questions of exactly what changes do you want to bring to the Occupied Territories Bill. We've heard Constitution mentioned. He's mentioned it actually twice recently. But being very clear, there is at most a possible 3-word change that could be put into the bill to say, instead of International Court of Justice, the Minister with regard to the International Court of Justice. That's that. What are the other changes they want to bring? He said we would need to amend every section. But they have not come forward and told us what are your amendments to each section and how many of them are about law and how many of them are about money and how many of them are about diluting justice for the sake of satisfying interests of a very narrow set of interests. And now he insults the intelligence of the Irish people by saying that we should swap a bill which has passed 8 stages, a bill which could be law in a fortnight if they wanted, with amendments, could be law in 2 weeks' time. To swap that for a possible, maybe, future bill that puts international justice on the never-never. Well, here it is. You cannot say to international justice, we'll have you later. Because when you step away from it, you damage it. You trample it. And the idea that we would wait, just to be clear, back in 2017, they told us, we're going to try and find a better political moment. We're going to wait and see if the atmosphere might improve for bringing this forward and taking action. Here's the message. It got worse. And if you do not hold your ground and take a stand and take meaningful action, it will continue to get worse. And if you give the new greedy investors, a head start now on the West Bank, a head start on the rubble in Gaza, if you allow a new round of settler violence, each time we step away from justice, we send a message to the bullies about impunity. And it is not okay. Now is the time for a message of courage. When we talk about courage, let's be clear. And actually, just before I talk about courage, I want to talk for one moment about interests. Because the mood music we're hearing is, well, what about interests? Values are lovely, but what about interests? It is first of all, it is in the interests of Ireland and of every human on this planet to have a world in which international justice and international law counts for something. That is in our interests. It is in our interest, and it is hard won after millennia of empire, after millennia of brutality and might is right. It is in our interest to have a world, as a small country, to have a world where there is a politics of principle and not just a politics of the biggest power takes all. It is in our interests to live, by the way, another area, on a livable planet. Because we're also saying, let's import LNG to keep our short-term interests and profiteering going. Profit is not always in the interests of humanity and in the interests of people. And for Ireland, a country which has respect worldwide, which negotiated the Sustainable Development Goals, we should be hanging on and leading the fight for a genuine multilateral world, for a UN that is respected, for international law that is respected. And that is what serves us and how we also serve others. So, I'm going to come now to courage, but maybe let's say a little bit about fear. So we had one senior government representative recently say her greatest fear was that we might not be invited to present the Shamrock. Her greatest fear. And that great fear is getting center stage, while the permanent terror which the children of Gaza and the West Bank are living in, a terror night after night, generation after generation, that terror, we're going to let that continue a little bit longer because we're so nervous about the Shamrock. Let's get some perspective on fear, and let's get some perspective on courage. Because if a child with their leg gone in Gaza can reach for a school book, if someone who has lost their family will dig through the rubble for the dead bodies of strangers, if a doctor can show the courage and love to stand by and save person after person because each one matters, because each human is equal and precious, and then walk with dignity and enter the tank of his oppressor, that I think, given that those in Palestine are showing us the courage and the love and the hope in justice, in peace, and in a future, we need to have the courage to work and stand up for peace, for justice, and for a future for all humanity, a future on a planet that's livable, and a future in which every child can sleep at night. And I want to just say as we finish, we will be holding the new government to account. Whether I'm inside or outside, we will be holding them. We will be saying, action! Enact the Occupied Territories Bill is the first point. But very clear, if you are not delivering the Occupied Territories Bill, do not expect the public to wait. The public will not allow their hands to be dipped in the flow of blood, the flow of weapons, and the flow of money to war crimes. And you cannot ask them to keep their hands trickling for 4 more years. The public will boycott, the public will divest, and the public will say no more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.